Good evening to the new literary phenomenon, Mr. Prajwal Parajule. All you passionate book lovers, readers with an insightful eye, internationally acclaimed scholars, regular participants, and our very own Bengal Club Book Club members to this monthly celebration of a book that we explore together. On this, the 22nd month of our book club meet, we are enormously chuffed and honored to welcome the keenly compelling, renowned young writer, Mr. Prajwal Parajule, who has very kindly made the time to be with us today, all the way from Paris. His first novel, Land Where I Flee, is on the platter for exploration. I'm Dr. Julie Banerjee Mehta, conceptualizer, curator, and anchor of the Bengal Club Book Club. And on behalf of the president, Mr. Kunal Sen, chair of our Bengal Club Library Subcommittee, Dr. Shundeep Chatterjee, and all my colleagues of our Library Subcommittee, our librarian, Shebunti Sengupta, and our technical team, thank you all for being here across puddles and ponds, diverse geographies and time zones. I must register my gratitude to my partner historian, Dr. Harish Mehta, for getting me in touch with Prajwal, whom he knew before I did. The Bengal Club straddles some very interesting colonial and post-colonial history. It was founded in 1827, 195 years ago, that's a long time, and is the oldest social club of Asia. One of its first presidents was Sir Charles Metcalfe. This is also the residence of Sir Thomas Babington Macaulay when he was the law member of the Supreme Council between 1834 and 1838. After my introduction and conversation with Prajwal, we will have our book club members ask a question each of the writer. Since we have a wonderful array of voices, let's keep our questions short and sharp so we might have a wealth of rich pickings in the limited time, 6 to 7:30, but I suspect this conversation might go on for longer. We will then do what we always do, a 3-minute response to Land Where I Flee, our book for exploration. Here, I'll have to be the bad cop and ring the bell so we keep to the 3-minute response time to the book. Bon voyage. Gangtok born, Indian writer, Nepali-speaking Parajule, based in New York, has become most recently an item in France's publishing industry. Winning the coveted French award for writing about the Nepali-speaking diaspora and blessed with burgeoning readership, both his fictional works, the book of short stories, The Gurkha's Daughter, and his first novel, Land Where I Flee, our book today for exploration, are hot off the press in France, being published as French paperback editions in August and September this year. That's a big deal for any writer. It is no surprise to see how people love his stories. The Gurkha's Daughter on the Calcutta University Master's English syllabus now for Indian writing in English for 2 years was a clear favorite with most of my class. Mr. Parajule's father is Indian Nepali and his mother Nepalese. In his conversations with the MA students in my class last year, the author spoke passionately about the treatment of women, the abjectness of the marginalized, the challenges of being in a state of irredeemable poverty, about epistemic violence, nationhood, citizenship, and being a minority in any nation. His short stories, Mixed Blessing, Let Sleeping Dogs Lie, No Land is Her Land, are visceral and unabashedly revealing about the masculinist domination and bodily assault women in general, and particularly from minorities, are forced to tolerate. In his first novel, Land Where I Flee, dysfunctional members of a scattered diasporic Nepali-speaking family have a reunion with their 84-year-old grandmother. This novel showcases Parajuli's adeptness and skill as a storyteller who captures the minutiae of human character and makes his characters dance in front of the readers. In his interaction with the Nepali-speaking students in my class, in particular, his stories resonated deeply. It's easy to see how Parajuli is passionate about teaching. Every summer, he has a hand-picked bunch of students at the creative writing department of the Sciences Political International University, Le Havre campus in Paris. In September 2011, Parajuli was applauded for being the youngest Indian author to be offered not one, but a two-book multi-country deal. He published his first book in 2012, a short story collection, The Gorkha's Daughter, describing and dramatizing the experiences of the Nepalese people and the Nepalese diaspora. His debut book was shortlisted for the 2013 Dylan Thomas Prize and longlisted for the Story Prize that came the same year. Parajuli's second book, Land Where I Flee, came out in 2013. It was an Independent on Sunday Book of the Year and a Kansas City Star Best Book of 2015. He was the first writer in residence at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies in 2013. In 2016, Prajwal Parajuli was invited to be a judge for the Dylan Thomas Prize. He was educated at Truman State University in Kirkskill, Missouri, and the University of Oxford. Before committing to a writing career, he worked as an advertising executive at the Village Voice. His novel Land Where I Flee came out in France at the worst possible time of the pandemic in March 2020. Strong measures were taken against the spread of the virus. Large events got cancelled, including the Paris Book Fair, to which Prajwal was invited. And bookstores remained closed for several months. Despite all this, Prajwal still came to France thanks to the support of his publisher and the French embassy in India. And he spent a few months on the road, despite the raging pandemic, taking part in small book events in various parts of the country. At that time, he was probably the only foreign writer touring France. The response was extremely positive. French readers absolutely loved his novel. It was shortlisted for the prestigious Émile Guimet Prize and went on to be picked up by a well-known paperback publisher. 2 years on, the Paris Book Fair eventually took place in April this year. Prajwal was there signing away copies of his book. The rest is history, and Prajwal is here with us in conversation with all of us today. So Prajwal, my first question to you is, here you are, still dining out on a banquet of two books. The first one, a book of short stories, The Gorkha's Daughter, and the second novel, Land Where I Flee, written a decade ago, that you won awards for and great accolades. These continue to be relevant and popular. How do you make sense of this?
Julie, thank you for your fantastic introduction. I do not deserve half the praise that you heaped on me, but it was good to hear. I will be very honest with you. I oscillate between feeling smug about the fact that these books that I wrote ages ago continue to be relevant, and feeling a little ashamed about the fact that I haven't produced anything new. I did not set out to be a writer. I knew I was fairly decent at it, but I embarked on a writing career simply because I had nothing to do with my life. I had quit a well-paying job as an advertising executive at the Village Voice, and I traveled a bit, but you can't be Indian and travel for too much without those "what the hell are you doing with your life" questions being thrown your way every second. So I started writing to shut my parents up. And just when I think of that, just when I think, okay, I'm actually going to get rid of all my social media accounts, I'm not going to be distracted by whatever happens, something wonderful ends up happening and drags me back to this world. And I find myself doing the very things I promised I would never do. I impose an embargo against literary festivals, for example. I tell myself I'm not going to make any more appearances because as wonderful as these things are, immensely distracting. And I have a lot of respect for writing 2,500 words, go to 3 meetings, and then attend an event at a literature festival, get sozzled with copious champagne, and then repeat it the next day. I can't. I am not one of those people. I work in a pretty one-dimensional way. If I am writing, that's the only thing I can do. I have to be completely immersed in that world. It sounds very pretentious, if you ask me, but there is some truth to it. So you were saying something.
I was going to pick up on exactly this point, but to many readers, that would be a sign of great honesty, that you say that you've told me before that you feel that you're an accidental writer.
And it pisses my publishers off when I say that.
Yes.
It really does.
Yes.
But I am speaking the truth here. To tell you that I had a story in me that was bursting to come out is a big fat lie.
Yes. So it's hard to believe though, because to many of us, you're a very fine writer, especially in this climate where you use the word pretentious. And I think a lot of writers are very pretentious. And you're also, I think, it's very humbling to hear what you have to say. So what do you think it is that you bring to the table? And I'm being very honest now, I'm turning the tables on you and asking you that what is it that you think you bring to the table that the Western reader is seeking? Is it the exotic that still feeds the burgeoning appetite of the European North American reader? Because a lot of the stories in Gurkha's Daughter, for instance, and then of course the brilliant, very compelling and flashes of incredible humor in Land Where I Flee, shows us that you have the acumen to build an ethos, to build characters of the ethos from where you came. And is it something to do with the fact that you are a Nepali speaking writer?
I think it's a combination of a number of things.
We can see.
I I do not think that the stories in the Gurkha's Daughter are half bad. I think Land Where I Flee is a fun novel. I do think that the stories in the Gurkha's Daughter work tremendously as a whole. I but yes, I mean, this was the first time someone from the Nepali-speaking world was published in the UK. A fiction writer, a work of fiction was being published in the UK. So there was a bit of that. There was excitement around reading a book from a person who was writing about a community that hadn't really been represented in the international publishing scene. So I do know that I'm not going to discount the fact that what I was writing about or what I wrote about made a difference. Judy, sometimes you do not understand how the publishing world functions. I am grateful for the reception. I am happy that I'm straddling this wonderful world where reviewers and critics and academics have embraced my books, but also that there are ordinary readers out there who are simply reading for pleasure, who will pick a copy of The Gurkha's Daughter and go, oh, this is actually very simply written.
Yes.
There is, I think The Gurkha's Daughter is a great book to introduce to a non-reader.
Yes. Yes.
That may not be the case with Land Where I Flee because, you know, it's got its long drawn out sentences and subordinate clauses and what have yous, but an abundance of subordinate clauses, excessive subordinate clauses, if you ask me. But The Gurkha's Daughter is one of those deceptively simply written books. And so that might also be a reason the book has appealed to the masses.
Yes. Here again, Prajwal, you know, you've opened a segue for me to ask you a question about the fact that there's a certain burden of representation as a post-colonial writer. And I think you managed to negotiate the eddies there very well. And you don't fall prey, but you turn the tables. And I think we had a conversation about this a few months ago, and it was very impressive that a character, for instance, like Munnu Bhai in Let Sleeping Dogs Lie, shows you that if you are a minority Nepali-speaking person in a majority Indian community, you have to bear the brunt of being discriminated against. But when you are part of a majority community of Nepalis or Nepali speakers, then you behave exactly in the same discriminatory way to a Muslim from Bihar. I think that brings me to the question, Prajwal, how did you think of negotiating and bringing out these very dodgy, complex issues of identity?
Julie, you've spoken about the burden of representation as a post-colonial writer. I think this burden of representation compounds when you are writing about a community that hasn't been written about much. You know, the burden of representation compounds further when you are writing about a community that hasn't been represented at all. And I was mindful of the fact that I wouldn't just portray stories of the Nepali-speaking people stories of the Nepali speaking people that we had all seen and heard and watched. Case in point, how are the Nepalis represented in popular culture? Watch your Bollywood movies. The Nepalis are often either whores or watchmen or cooks, which are wonderful things to be, no doubt, but not all that we are.
Yes.
I wrote about an upper middle class family because there are hundreds of millions of upper middle class families out there like mine, of Nepali speaking families like mine. And it just seemed like the most ordinary thing to do there. So just as there are wonderful people in every community, there are awful people too. We in the Northeast, we in the Himalayas love crying about how we are discriminated against in the bigger Indian cities. We love to talk about how we are other, but you just have to go to a place like Shillong in the Northeast where you will be the guard out in no time. You have to go to a place like Gangtok in Sikkim where there is such a big difference on the treatment meted out on you when you're an Indian from the heartland versus an Indian from the region, from Sikkim.
Yes.
So encapsulating all that seemed like the sensible thing to do. And I wanted a Muslim shopkeeper because I grew up in a neighborhood that had someone called Chunnu Bhaiya.
Right.
Okay, and Chunnu was the neighborhood favorite. His father was, had a reputation for being a bit of a scumbag, but Chunnu was the neighborhood favorite. And I have always wondered what would happen if, say, one of us, one of my friends or someone like me were to go to Chunnu's store and pilfer a bar of chocolate or two.
Yeah.
Because to actually call attention to the theft would be destroying this very delicate balance.
Yes.
He had found his place in the community. He was sending platters of sewai on Eid to all his neighbors. They were sending out platters during Dasai to him, but someone like him has had to tread on eggshells all this while, and you piss off one person in a community like that, you're likely going to get beaten up or your place burnt down. And I saw no point beating about the bush with the reality there. And, that sometimes rubs people off the wrong way.
Yeah.
When, there's always that talk about, oh, we finally see representation. We finally see us represented in these books. We are finally, we have the Oxford educated doctor banker and the America educated doctor. You're writing about all these people, wonderful, but why write about the negative things? Why write about the discrimination that is meted out on a so-called lower caste person? Aren't you washing the communities dirty and in public, etc., etc.?
Yes.
To which I have to say, this really reeks of a lack of maturity in the readership. And I have to say, I'm not a public relations brochure. I'm a fiction writer. Yeah, I do not see something like that happening to a Bengali writer writing in English.
Right.
Because there have been hundreds and hundreds of Bengali writers writing in English for centuries.
Yes.
And that hasn't happened in my case. So as wonderful as the advantages of being one of the first people to write has been, there are also challenges like that, which may strike as a non-challenge to someone else.
Wonderfully said, and points very well noted. So my next question to you is, France, you had once told me, is the only country where a chance meeting with a complete stranger can bring about a revelation. Could you explain that statement? And very intrigued and so encouraged by that kind of committed, invested readership.
Julie, I'm not going to romanticize France right now because Paris is so miserable. It has been raining. It's gray, it's morbid, and yeah, I am ready to abandon it for a few months and return when the weather turns better. That being said, there's no country other than France where you might want to be as a writer who has been translated into the language of the country. There is just so much excitement in reading about other cultures and books that have been translated from other languages. I haven't seen that anywhere else in the world. There's a degree of that in Norway, perhaps, maybe in Poland. The Germans like claiming that they read more than anybody, but I think the French beat them.
Hands down.
Hands down. And there is something to be said about this, the soft power of France in the form of, champagne and cheese and what have you. But I actually think that it's the independent bookstores here, the role they play in the community. France was perhaps the only country in the world that actually decided that bookstores were a necessity during COVID. So after a few weeks of dilly-dallying, they were allowed to open along with supermarkets, along with places that sold food. So that's saying something. When people were hesitant to enter bookstores, the government did this very generous thing where it swallowed up the postal costs incurred by bookstores. So you were sending these books out to people for the same cost that you would have sold it had they come into your bookstore. And Amazon, that ugly behemoth, is not allowed to, or any other seller is not allowed to discount a book for more than 5%. How wonderful is that? That's the kind of respect that a writer wants anywhere. You respecting this creation so much that no one is allowed to discount it for more than 5%. It's a country where the bureaucratic claptrap is almost as bad as South Asian nations. Dealing with paperwork is enough to turn you mad. But
that's why we learned it from them. We learned Indochina and Indonesia and India and South Asia learned the bureaucratic claptrap from Europe, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a degree of efficiency in the UK, in countries, America is super efficient that way, but France, oh my God, times that when I have to write to the health department, I can't email them or call them. I have to write a letter to them. That's where we are in certain areas, but yeah, as far as the country's love for literature and books goes, there is nothing to complain about.
Prajwal, I will leave you with my last question so that we can have some voices in to ask you questions and then get on to the responses as we do. I wanted to invoke your character Ram Bahadur Damai, my favorite character in Land Where I Flee, because I think it shows your insight into the issues of caste, class, and the various stratifications of our South Asian Hindu societies. Absolutely brilliant that he's a Dalit, but he is the one who knows the scriptures better than anybody else. And in my lived experience, I can say that I have known two people who have been staff during my parents' time, and they were welcomed in during the festivals, the pujas, because they were so close to the scriptures. Lot of empathy there. I want to ask you, in your process of crafting the characters, and I think all across the board, all the members of the Bengal Club and scholars who are here today, who are going to talk about your book, agree that you are a master craftsman of character. So the question is very simple. Some novelists, fiction writers begin with a single image. In The English Patient, Michael Ondaatje says, he thought of a nurse and a doctor conversing at night, and that set off the whole plot. With you, how do you bring out a character from the imagination, or is it a real person, or how does it work with you?
Julie, I steal, I mix and match. When I come across a truly colorful character, a character who's going to brighten the pages of my book, I simply transplant him or her into the book. I have done these crazy things in the past where I created Facebook accounts of my characters. Yeah, when you create someone's Facebook account, you list what their favorite music is, what their hobbies are, what pages they would join. Unfortunately, the characters that I came up with from this method didn't really do it for me. I have often mixed and matched various traits of various people to come up with someone. I am guessing this is a question that will be asked of me at some point. I enjoy writing female characters far more than I do men. I do think that the characters and the male characters in Land Where I Flee are a little flat. And by the way, and this is something I'm going to put it out there, I wrote this book a while ago, so I am going to be critical of it. I am not going to be crying into my pillow if we say negative things about it. It's perfectly fine. I have sufficient distance from the book where I don't particularly care, because I do think that The Gurkha's Daughter is a very, very good collection of short stories, whereas Land Where I Flee is a novel that sometimes comes out of the creative writing masters. I do think that there are some aspects of the novel where it tries to be virtuous when the virtuosity hasn't been earned.
I think you're being very hard on yourself.
No, it's all right. Okay, we can talk about it later. But so that's how my characters often come about. You steal, you mix and match,
Right,
you
right.
sometimes create profiles. I find myself getting more animated as I discover someone like Chitralekha
Yes.
as because she keeps getting more and more fun as the pages go,
Yeah.
and sometimes when she does things like blowing smoke on Manasa's face, I don't even know how those things come about. You're thinking that they're going to have this deep, affecting conversation, and then the character decides to sprout wings of their own, and then meander into territories you'd never imagined. So, and that's when I have the most fun writing, when you sit down to write with a particular direction and you just find your characters disobeying you and running away in directions that were even forbidden to them. And see, this is how people get reputations for being pretentious, when you endow on your characters the power to run away on their own and so on and so forth. But I hope that helps.
Yes, that helps. And I think it's also your very wicked and well-honed sense of humor that makes these characters sprout wings and go another way than the way that you want them to go.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of Land Where I Flee is when Bhagwati does that deed in the end. Here is the person you just wouldn't expect anything out of.
Yes.
And I actually love it when she has that conversation with the cabbie and she goes, yeah, Momo sellers in America make even more money or something along those lines. And again, I didn't have this in mind at all when I started writing it. I thought Bhagwati was going to have one of those. I thought Bhagwati's climactic moment would come with her confronting her grandmother and saying, you will not say anything about him anymore because this is a non-issue now.
Yes.
But yeah, she surprised me, as I'm sure she did all of you, with
all of us. Yes.
The thing at the end. Oh wow, this is a fun discussion. See, a good discussion is when you get excited about writing again, and thank you. So this is I'm hoping that by the end of this I get so inspired that
I wouldn't be surprised if you're really going to think of another book, because we have a whole heap of people coming who are truly wonderful readers. They have we've taught each other, and I think we've enriched each other in so many ways. So may I call upon Professor Choitali Moitro? Choitali, go right ahead, ask your question, make your comments, and enjoy.
It's been wonderful listening to you, Prajwal. And I was wanting to ask you that as you look at the state of impermanence of home, that is one of your themes. Quite a few of your characters have names with a religious ring: Bhagwati, Agastya, Manasa, even Ruthva. Of course, Julie Dee told about Ram. So are you trying to find a rootedness in these by using these names? Any insights you want to share? Not all, maybe, but quite a few have names with a religious ring. Why is this?
Never thought of it. These were just names that I liked. I've always been fond of Mansa, and I think there's something about Mansa being the serpent goddess.
Yes.
Right?
She's a folk goddess. Yeah.
Okay, so I just thought that given who she had become in the book, this acerbic character who I think she's the most depressed of the lot. I think, all of them have a few sessions with their therapist do, but I do think that Mansa is having the most difficult time of them all. And I just thought that the name somehow made sense for her. I chose Agastya for the very simple reason that his name ended with an A, which I figured would trip readers up a little, because I wanted him to have a name that could be either feminine or masculine. I think when I introduced Agastya in the beginning,
Yes.
the way I do it is the person he wanted to get married to, blah, 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 blah. But it's only at the end of the 2 paragraphs or so that I talk about his being in a relationship with a man. And I think, so Agastya, there's there. And I think there's also a sentence in the book where, he goes, if that extra A in his name hadn't been there, would he have been, a more masculine person or something along those lines? So that was just, it was just to simplify things. Bhagwati. So I have come across Nepali-speaking people whose names are Bhagwati, but not anyone from, say, my generation. I mean, it would be someone from maybe my grandparents' generation. So I think I wanted a slightly old-fashioned name there. All right. I don't even know what Rutwa is, honestly. Is Rutwa also the name of a god?
No, but then if you think of Rutwa, a little bit of it does mean. So I just thought of asking you that, would there be any reason for this?
No, this is I think there were this was a very simple reason, just a fondness for the names and some connection, as in the case of Mansa, between the character and the deity they represent.
Great. But I think, Choitali, we've got good answers there and a great question. Thank you. Okay, so can I call on Dr. Harish? You have a question for Prajwal. Please keep it short and tight.
Yes. Hi, Prajwal. I have a question, and that is, you do some research, I imagine, prior to writing, and once you started writing and you produced, say, a first draft, and you're looking at it, do you then do a little more research? And the second question is, do you do a lot of rewrites, on your first, second drafts, and are they kind of similar to the first, or do they change substantially?
Thank you. I am one of those readers who just vomit everything out onto the page on the first draft. So my first draft could be another writer's notes, actually. I like the idea of writing fast and editing slow, so I type away on the computer, and I do not particularly care about word echoes and punctuation and semicolons jumping out of my ears, wishing there were commas and things like that. It is when I print this draft out and sit down with a pen and paper that the main writing happens. That is when the sentences get rewritten. That is when a degree of some degree of beauty is introduced to the text. And then with subsequent drafts, there are changes. So my first draft is very, very, very different from the final draft. Research. One of the stories, how many of you here have read The Gurkha's Daughter? I know this is a discussion of Land Where I Flee, but okay, I can't see all of you, but I'm guessing that there are some people who've read The Gurkha's Daughter.
The MA students who are here would have said 50% would have read.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I see some hands go up. Thank you. So there is a story in the Gurkha's Daughter called No
Yes.
Land is Her Land, which is about the Bhutanese refugee situation. Harish, the first draft of that story read like a mind-numbing UN report, a research paper so full of statistics, so full of numbers, that even the most valiant reader would have abandoned it after a few pages. And that is when I realized, okay, yes, I mean, there is a bit of an issue here. I do want to talk about the Bhutanese refugee situation, but I need to unload that information in a way that is not going to alienate my readers. I need to unload it. Maybe I need to stagger the information unloaded. And yeah, it took many what it became. And research is only when I was line editing Land Where I Flee that I thought to myself that I might have to put up in order to protect myself. I had a Facebook status update along the lines of, dear friends, familiar, because like a dumbass, in one of the earlier drafts, or in a draft that nearly went to print, Ram Bahadur Damai says something along the lines of, yes, so many Hindus and only one temple. Only one temple, because that is what my research of Bhutan. Turns out there were a few, and apparently the Indian army. I'm so grateful for having had the brain to put that up and nix whatever factual misinformation there was. So I think that answers the question.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Just a short follow-up, if you don't mind.
No, I'm sorry, Harish. I have to cut you off.
Okay.
Just to, sorry about that.
Revisit your question later if we have time, Harish. The follow-up.
I think when you
Yes,
it's a reason for you to come to Calcutta and spend time with us.
All right. Okay.
Okay. Have time, sure.
Okay.
Would you like to ask a question, Urmi Sinha?
Hi, Prajwal. I just wanted to know the fact of transgenders and people and things like that. Considering that you started your book so early and that was your first book, I mean, what is it that which was usually heard in our society?
All right. No, I think every Indian writer out there has a desire to write about the Hijra community. It's because I do think that given who they are, how they've been depicted and popular, you just want to write about them because of how much color they will add to your book, how much fascination they will trigger in the minds of the world. And I do also think that had I written the book, say, a year or two ago, Agastya would not have been a closeted character. When I was writing the character of Prasanthi, and as I'm sure you can see, I was having a lot of fun doing that. I was doing what Bollywood movies are doing. I was totally converting her into this caricature I was making her if she was there for to exasperate them, yes, but for the reader's comic, had this little monologue, had this conversation with myself, where I wanted Prasanthi to be equal footing with the rest of the siblings, which is why after the initial, say, 100 or 150 pages, you actually see a side of Prasanthi where after she gets, like, what could she do? Like, what was, she could, if I were to write a sequel to A Land Where I Flee, I would make Prasanthi a politician. Again, I would have rations or something. Anyway, I am digressing here. I wanted this book to take into account every South Asian taboo you could think of, and sort of have fun on book. And where she goes, could the flamboyance have been toned down? Could she become a person who was just not a comic relief to people, or when the sentence along the lines of, but then she would get so tired of putting up a front. It wasn't who she was. Why could she not be this, be this fat little reflection that Agastya has, where he goes, how wonderful that Prasanthi was her sexuality. How wonderful who she was on her sleeve. There was no pretension. That was also to sort of show the difference between the lives of the two. I mean, you have this oncologist King Martin and this servant in the oncologist was envious of the fact that Prasanthi was so completely unapologetically out.
True. Yeah. Vivek, your question?
I'll take a slightly different line, if I may. I see from the place where I flee that that you are a people person writer. You've got strong characters. They come around and you are discussing them. However, what really turns me on, and has all my life, is the unique geography of the land where you were born, and it stretches in east and west. And I see you don't really touch on that at all. Maybe Chitralekha looking at Kanchenjunga in the morning, but that's about it. What do they do to her? Nothing. What do they do to other characters? Nothing.
Thank you, Vivek. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I have a lot of respect for writers like Ewan McEwan and Rushdie, who will describe a blade of grass for 4 pages using the most lyrically dexterous language possible. I am not one of those writers. I do think a little of how it might have been a missed opportunity. I do think that it might have made sense for me to write 10 more sentences on the Kanchenjunga changing hue. The other day I had a discussion with a book. There was a book event in Lyon, and one of the attendees asked me a question about what my weakness might be as a writer. And I said, perhaps the idea of descriptive writing just bores me, which is why I do not describe the jagged peaks of the Kanchenjunga and you know, the Teesta flowing, and you know, and come up with an analogy on life, etc., etc. I think it is just who you are as a writer and trying to stay true to yourself. And this is how you know what a twisted person I am. Every time I try to describe something beautiful, I have this mischievous urge to somehow introduce something gross in the text. I do not know if this is a land where I flee, but I think there's something about, you know, the Teesta whizzing by and monkeys plucking lice off one another as they near the Sikkim border. You know, so I guess I'm just this person whose aesthetic sense has been tainted by a little, you know, whose idea of this perfect beauty doesn't exist.
Sorry, but I feel I should jump in here for a second for Vivek's sake as well, Prajwal. And that is, you are an avid trekker. I mean, let's not make any bones about the fact that you love the mountains and you know that land of yours like the back of your hand. So, you know, I think it was an honest clarification to Vivek's question. And it's also the way that you as a writer thinks. You know, it's your mind is not towards a realistic impressionistic painting, but it is towards, I think it is that wicked strain of humor where you juxtapose you know, beauty with the beast. That's the way your mind works. So, you know,
I think that is what it is. I've had this asked of you, you know, this question asked of me a few times, and it's actually, Vivek, you're a trekker too, right? It's people like you who are extremely enamored of the mountains, of the Himalayas, of the forests in the region, who ask me why I haven't spent reams of pages doing justice to the beauty. And I love that this question has come up, but yeah, I think it's just, Julie, you're right. It's just, I also have this thing where, to me, a writer like, say, Amit Chaudhary, who writes the most mellifluous sentences, whose words you linger on for, you know, minutes and minutes before moving on to the next page, is not the kind of writer I've ever wanted to be. I want my reader to be turning pages. I do not want my reader to be fixated. I'd be thrilled if I get thrilled when readers talk about the clarity of my writing. I think when Publishers Weekly reviewed one of my books, they actually spent quite a bit of time on the clarity of the writing. To me, I mean, that is a strength. To me, the fact that you do not have to reread a sentence twice is a strength. And I think that there is something about describing a flower that would lend itself to a delaying of the plotting of the book, a delaying of the way the book moves forward. Does that make sense?
Vivek?
It makes sense to me, but I also think that there's, without getting cluttered down by it, very often it lends atmosphere. it's not taking away from what your central theme is in any case, and particularly I feel, I mean, I am certainly turned on by I go on treks, and my wife asked me, why would you do that for 10, 12 days and so uncomfortable, living in a tent and you've got a sleeping bag, and how do you do it? And I find I don't even remember that later. I remember what I've seen there, which you won't see from ground level. You get up to a point or a point of view, and it affects your character. That's what I was thinking about. That would be affecting your character, not really anything, adding on a dimension what you're trying to convey. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've covered enough ground on this one. Let's move on, Prajwal, to Anusuya Pal, who's also a very avid reader in our membership of the Bengal Club. And talking about the club. Hi.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. Anusuya, just hold on a minute. Prajwal, I want to introduce you to our president of the club. Most unusual, Mr. Kunal Sen, who's made time in his busy schedule to be here. Very encouraging, very supportive of the book club. So Kunal, this is Prajwal. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Julie. Just a word, it's no question, it's just an observation. Prajwal, the more I hear you today, it was really amazing. And the book that you wrote was so wonderful because it talks about family, about relationship, about people striving for individual freedom in a society that compels them to hide their innermost selves. It was a wonderful piece of literature. And Prajwal, one more thing, the thorny issues that are part of the subcontinental mindscape, you have brought it so very well in your book. It was really a pleasure to read it. And I'm so happy that though I was late in joining in, but I could hear some of your comments, what you expect from the reader, and it was a really wonderful evening. Thank you so much. Thank you, Julie.
Very much.
Thank you, Kunal. This is awesome. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Okay, Anusuya, go for it. Let's hear your views.
So, well, I just have to say I haven't completed reading the book and I am kind of 50% through it. So I've been just waiting on tenterhooks, wondering if anyone's going to be a spoiler in the discussion so far, because I didn't want to know what's coming up.
Okay.
However, I was very curious to know, I mean, you answered many of my questions. The selection of the characters that made up the family, quite frankly, the character of Chitralekha, who oscillates between two extremes, almost like, being a schizophrenic character. So how did you come up with a 84-year-old lady who is so worldly wise, quite very modern for this time because of her acceptance of all of Prashanti's eccentricities and, honesty in life, when she's so hypocritical about her own grandchildren and wanting them to toe the line already. So that characterization or the fleshing out of that personality, I mean, that was what made me very curious, actually. Where did it come from? And did you have anybody in mind? I mean, from an author's point of view, how did she come into being in your mind?
I had read plenty of books growing up where the grandmother was this docile woman who pickled onions, set out cushions in the sun, and whispered stories into her grandchildren's ears. And, sort of the image that we have of our grandmothers, right? And I didn't want to write that. I wanted a somewhat uneducated woman or a poorly educated woman who was, who made playthings out of her, out of politicians, who was kowtowed by men in power. I also wanted a character who was deeply flawed. I mean, we're all deeply flawed. There's no denying that. But I wanted someone whose expectations of her family were extremely high, Because you must remember that Chitralekha is very much a product of her surroundings,
Generation.
her age. I mean, she was 84 in 2012. Had she still been alive, she would have been 94. Wait, I think the book was written in 2010 or 11. Anyway, so in her late 90s. And I mean, this isn't a woman who has grown up on Netflix. If Chitralekha were alive today, she wouldn't understand Netflix. She wouldn't know what to watch. She has almost no English. Her knowledge of Hindi is quite poor. And so you can't expect her to be this extremely broad-minded woman. Yeah, I mean, she's done a number of things that make you want to applaud her, but you also want to throttle her at times. And,
That's true.
and that's why I think she is such a compelling character, if I may say so myself. I do think Chitralekha is by far the best character I've created. I think she is superior to Prasanthi. I think she is superior to any of the characters in the Gurkha's Daughter. And there's this part about her rape.
Yeah.
Which, again, if I had written books, say 2 years ago, that would likely not have even been a part of the book. I do not know why I introduced it. It might be a bit of a shoehorn, you know. But I guess where I was trying to go with that is I don't think it's very sensitively done as a writer, honestly.
Now, would you
Absolutely.
say that it came in as an afterthought in your rewrite?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I wrote the book many, many years ago. And as I said before, I have sufficient distance from the book to be critical of it, right? And yeah, that was, one of the things I might have removed, or perhaps dealt with it in a slightly different way. For example, when Rutwa talks about it, I do think he talks about it. I mean, again, that was Rutwa's character doing the talking about it, and it was perfectly in character for him to use the words da 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 da. I'm not going to repeat them here, but yeah, I mean, every writer looks back at a book he has written and goes, oh, I might have done this differently. I might have done that differently. And this is my saying that if the book had been written a little later, I would have made Agastya completely out, and I would have likely gotten rid of the rape episode, and perhaps the family would have been pissed off at Rutwa for simply writing about them, not about the description of the rape. But again, that wouldn't have been that heinous, right? What writer doesn't write about his family?
Absolutely.
So anyway.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, Raka Sen, are you here? Yes, Raka, would you be interested in asking a question? Raka is a francophone person.
Oh.
Related very closely, works with the Alliance Française. Raka?
Hello, Julie.
Hi, Raka.
Hello.
Go ahead.
The thing is that, of course, I'm not prepared, but I'm
That's okay. That's okay.
extremely happy that he mentioned France as such a literate country, and that so I mean how much they support young authors to come up, and that he was at the Paris Book Fair, where actually somebody from Alliance Française got the Romain Rolland Prize this year for translation. That is Chiranjan Chatterjee, and we really felicitated him a few days back. And I'm so happy that France encourages these young authors to come up.
Yes.
This is all I want to tell you. I'm very proud of it. Really.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. So let's, there's a whole heap of people here who are dying to jump in. And before I turn to my MA students, perhaps Professor Ripandi Lepcha, would you like care to ask Mr. Parajuli a question? Go ahead, Ripandi, keep it short and sharp.
Okay. Actually, all my questions were answered during this question answer sessions, and especially when Professor Julie Mehta asked Prajwala about the text and everything. The one thing about the burden of representation that you talked about. So while you were writing the text, The Gurkha's Daughter, as well as To the Land Where I Flee, did you feel that you were burdened with the weight of responsibilities, as in because you were representing your own culture, you're representing your own society and your own community? So did you feel burdened, or were you very careful? And did you make conscious choices and decisions, or while picking up or sketching the characters?
A little bit. I did wonder how. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the backlash that Kiran Desai's wonderful book, The Inheritance of Loss, received because of its depiction of Nepali-speaking characters. I do think The Inheritance of Loss is an excellent book, but I was wary of the reception it had gotten in my part of the world. And I realized that if you started worrying about who would be offended, you just wouldn't write a book. You would write a watered down version, a public relations brochure or something. And I worry tremendously about the way things are going right now, where people have problems with cultural appropriation, where we have taken things a little too far. I wrote about a transgender character. Could that be seen as, perhaps I'll be criticized about that if I would have been criticized if I'd written that book yesterday. Yes, I understand that you need to be sensitive about it. I understand that if you're describing, say, an Afghan child, perhaps do not use use derogatory terms, or if you're describing, say, a Mongolite feature person in the Northeast, perhaps do not use terms that would be offensive to them. But what if a character in the book, what if whatever derogatory comments are made by a character in a book, which gives us an insight into who they are? This is something I talk about with my students all the time. 18 and 19-year-olds have become so sensitive about various things, and I mean, in a lot of ways, we're moving in the right direction. In my travel writing class, we've been reading travel stories written back in the 80s and 90s. A lot of what we read wouldn't pass muster today. It would be construed as, okay, this is being racist, this is being extremely discriminatory, this is disrespectful, etc., etc. And that's true. I'm glad we're thinking about all that, but we need to also know that these were texts written in the 80s, where the level of political correctness wasn't what it is now. I think we left-leaning people have taken things, have taken things a little too far. And again, to admit that on a public setting may just cancel me. Ripandi, I don't know if this has happened with your students, but sometimes when a majority of the class agrees on something, a student in my class is afraid to voice an opinion that is, a contrarian opinion, and will write an email to me later saying that I was afraid of being canceled.
It always happens.
Yeah,
It
I'm
happens.
just going to jump in for a minute here, if I might, and would love to hear your views on that, Fandi. But I have a lot of my MA students here on this forum now, and I think the possibility of self-censorship is what Prajwal is talking about. And even in the University of Toronto, I felt that it is also the business of the instructor, the professor, to create a zone of comfort in that space where the alternative opinion can be voiced without feeling a burden of shame or a burden of fear. Would you agree, Prajwal?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it is the teacher's responsibility, but this generation has embraced cancel culture in a way that we perhaps do not understand, Julie. And there is that real nervousness where there's a little nervousness. And I've had these emails that, say, oh, by the way, I did not agree with what the rest of the students said, but I didn't make my opinions known because I was going to be canceled. As an instructor, one of the first thing I do in class is actually have them answer a questionnaire. What are your trigger warnings? I understand that people get triggered. I do. But when you are teaching a class in creative writing where some very, very personal issues are discussed, where you're writing, you're bearing out your heart, you're bearing out your soul. So it's a fine line between taking into account everyone's sensitivities and allowing people to write what they want to write.
Absolutely.
And 10 years ago, I would have said, you write what you want to write. This is, there's no self-censorship here. But in these days, I don't anymore because, again, kids have been brought up very, very differently from the way we have. And I have students more worried about whitewashing a character than anything else, when what I want them to do is string words together to form a proper sentence. Can we worry about whether your text is going to cause offense a little later? For now, why don't we, write proper sentences? And I'm very glad that students are thinking about these things. There's also no real way to talk about these issues without offending someone or the other out there.
That is the problem of politically correct, being politically correct, I think.
I do, and I know there are a number of educators here. I would love to know your input, but I do say, let's try to be respectful of everyone here, but let's also try not to cancel anyone for their opinions shared.
True. Wonderful. Prajwal, Mr. Arindam Shil is back. He's in the entertainment industry and he's very well read. He's read Land Where I Flee page to page. Hats off to him, and would love to hear him. After that, Anju Munshi, our member also, avid reader, writer. Okay, so Arindam, you go first.
Okay, thank you, Julie and Prajwal. it's been wonderful hearing you, and I appreciate we are at the end of the conversation. Julie has wonderfully carved out this conversation, and it's been pretty much exhaustive. So there were so many questions I really wanted to ask, which got answered, or maybe we really would want, and we would from Bengal Club would like to invite you sometime whenever you are in Kolkata or India. There would be a lot more to discuss. Now, my bit of observation and the questions. Observation in the sense that when a writer who's not writing in his mother tongue gets a double-edged sword as an advantage, the perspective, and the perspective with which you are writing about Nepal or Sikkim, and the perspective with which you are writing about someone trying to cope in United States. So, for example, the very nuance of how to pronounce dominoes and things like that was so very interesting. What I found extremely interesting about your writing, despite your long run sentences, is never your imagery broke. Being a person who creates images, and I felt your book, your writing is full of images, so very well edited, that as it happens in a well edited film, that it passes from one chapter, one act to another, from the characterization, from the introduction to getting into the main hold of the story. Everything has been very extremely cinematic. So thus my question, because most of the questions have been answered. Do you have cinema in mind when you write at times, or do you get influenced by cinema anyhow? That's one part. And the second part of my question is, you've written exhaustively on your roots. You would definitely want to further keep writing on that. But what else, being on the other side of the world and seeing the world in your own eyes, very objectively, what are you writing for future?
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. I am an avid TV watcher. I love movies. I love TV shows. I'm guessing all of us here are big movie fans, and but I do not have cinema in mind when I write. I have been told that the books are the novel as well as stories are very cinematic, and I see what people mean, but I do not have cinema in mind when I write novels and collections of short stories. I have dabbled with a screenplay. I adapted The Immigrants, The Lost Story, and The Gurkha's Daughter into a screenplay, and that I'm equal parts proud and ashamed of. But yeah, when I write novels, no, there's absolutely no cinema in mind. The other thing, perhaps because I have evolved considerably as a writer between the books and now, I have been very unsatisfied with whatever I've written. Whatever little that I've produced since the books came out has not, met the Prajwal standards. Again, this could be because I have higher standards now. It could also be because I've become a far more conscious writer. Again, these are issues that we addressed in my discussion with Ripandi. Am I thinking about things like, oh, is this my story to tell? Should I be telling this story? Am I taking into account sensitivities of the people being written about? Could be. Like it could be a combination of a variety of things. But I had a question asked of me at a literature festival about what I think home is, right? Because I live in so many places. I haven't I haven't lived in Gangtok in a very long time. And I told them that I discovered that home was the Himalayas and Gangtok and Kalimpong and that part of the world for the simple reason that that's all I can write about. I hope one day that, I will write a book based in Italy or fully based in New York. But so far, I do think that for a person with an existence as peripatetic as mine, my writing is firmly rooted in the Eastern Himalayas. And that will likely be what you will read from me as the next book, if I ever get around to finishing it. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. That really answers a lot, and that's fantastic.
A very incisive
Yeah.
question, exhaustive answer. We really couldn't ask for more. Wonderful combo. Thank you, Arindam. It's been a pleasure having this interaction. I would like very much to call upon Anju Munshi, if you're here from Seattle.
There are many shades of anxieties and apprehensions, bringing it to our mind the importance of adversity quotient. We've all heard of emotional quotient, intelligence quotient, social quotient and all that. But adversity quotient, AQ, is an ability to go through a rough patch in life and come out of it without losing your mind and composure. Most characters exhibit that. So what matters, I think, is how well we nurture our emotions. And it comes before Oxford education and a wealthy standard. All characters, Agastya, Ruthva, Bhagwati and Mansa, they represent different shades of problems, cracks in our lives, normal human issues. And this is where adaptability gets a lot of importance. Not only adversity, AQ could also be the adaptability quotient. The most touching thing was when Bhagwati says, quote, refugees didn't belong anywhere, but she belonged nowhere. Born a Nepali-speaking Indian with a dead father from Sikkim, unquote, they're all examples of the survivor mode and adaptability. I like that spirit the most. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sukanya from the media. Very kindly.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi, Shukona. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello. Hi.
So, I was hearing so many things about the characters, the novel, the everything, but I just wanted to ask a simple thing, as in the book is named "The Land Where I Flee." So when you're fleeing to some place, and when you're coming from different parts of the world just to, go to some place, you are escaping from the worldly problems. Aren't you coming back home? The feeling of warmth, the feeling of security that these three children, these three siblings who came back to their grandmother to celebrate her birthday, this was a feeling of security, a feeling of homeliness, a feeling of motherhood. As we often, interchange the words, well, our homeland with the words our motherland. So the femininity, the warmth that we feel when we go back to our mother. For example, all these your siblings like Manasa, Bhagwati, all these people have their individual problems, and they're all running back and coming back to home. They're coming back to a place of comfort. So I wanted to talk about that.
I don't think these, thank you for your question, Sukanya, but I don't think these characters are essentially running to a place of comfort. If anything, each one of them is dreading the reunion. There are secrets that threaten to be revealed. There is confrontation that they are certain that will be had. And I came up with the title Land Where I Flee for the simple reason that there's a lot of fleeing happening, honestly. There is, we are fleeing our reality, we're fleeing the demons in our heads. We are not just migrating for economic or political reasons. We're migrating our minds. We're running away from so many things. This is not a simple case of, oh, I'm going to move to New York because it's going to make me a rich person. I mean, there are people being compelled to leave Bhutan. And I just thought there was something slightly poetic about the ungrammatical land where I flee. Is it to the land where you flee? Is it the land where you flee from? Which is why I came up with it. But the idea of returning to your motherland, of returning to your family, for the family as a source of comfort is not really what the book encapsulates. Like, these characters are shit scared. They're actually extremely nervous about their reunion. I mean, if it were a family, like so many of our families are, where people are wonderful and loving and caring, and even if there are differences, we know how to set them aside. We know how not to talk about them. But I mean, this is a family that has been scarred in so many ways. A perfectly innocuous idea proposed by Bhagwati about going to the spa to Manasa gets her completely riled up, and I mean that shouldn't be happening in a happy place. It shouldn't be happening in a place where people go to feel warm. One of the reasons, it would have made sense for me to have the cottage, the bungalow where Chitralekha lives, be this lovely Himalayan English style cottage with floors that creak just enough to be comforting, and trees outside, and so on and so forth. But I didn't want it to be a warm place. I wanted it to be a little dirty. I mean, when Mansa sees that the sheet hasn't even been changed, I think the sheet was last changed the last time she was there. I wanted to take away from the warmth of the place, the warmth of home. And is it still home if it doesn't evoke in you these feelings that you've just described, this feelings of love and warmth? And I mean, that is sort of a question that the book seeks to address. Why is it that Manasa returns to the house? Why is it that Manasa returns to Sikkim? Is it because she is fleeing from her reality, or is she going because she wants to flee to this issue? Sorry, I mean, what I'm saying is there is no black and white here at all. It's, like everything in life, there are shades of gray. And I didn't want this to be a reunion where everyone is happy and excited, and I didn't want it to end with everyone having resolved their problems, having resolved life itself. Because that's not what life is. I mean, you do not tie things with a lovely, a neat little bow and let things, and just move on. We carry with us all these petty jealousies, insecurities, anger, angst throughout life.
So you are the master of dysfunctional family histories.
I love nothing better than the dysfunctional. I think one of the reasons for that is I grew up in a proper joint family in Gangtok. The kind of family that you don't really see even in India anymore. So it was my dad, mom, my sisters, my uncle, aunt, and my cousins. And looking around me, I found no family like mine. And the question everyone then asks me is, oh, as in it was the same kitchen and the same tijori. And yes, that was how it was. So that is the kind of family I grew up in, which is why my interest in families has been around since, I say an unhealthy interest in families. How is it that a nuclear family of 2 parents and 2 kids didn't get bored? That was the question I asked of my friends all the time. You have only 4 people in your family. How is that possible? I mean, we have 9 people and, a revolving door of guests. And so, I mean, that's the kind of family I grew up in. And I have always had a special interest in peeping into people's windows and seeing what transpires.
And you're a master craftsman because you put the stage onto the page. Wonderful. I have a whole slew of students, but we are so close to 8 o'clock. I don't know whether Prajwal has the time. When do you have to leave, Prajwal? You've been so generous.
No, it is for, I can't believe we've been at this for more than
2 hours nearly.
Should we, wow, no, that's incredible. May I say this? Should we,
wrap it up in about one more person?
Okay?
Sorry?
Is another 10 minutes okay?
Oh, that would be very, very generous. I'm going to ask Mr. Vinod Pillai, who is a very astute contributor. Vinod, are you still here, my dear?
Yeah, I'm here, Julie. Thank you
Hi,
very much. Hello. Thank you very much. Hello, Prajwal. And I've enjoyed this conversation, and a lot of the things that I thought of bringing up, they've already got discussed. But then I'll just bring up 1 or 2 points. What I think is special about the book is that, yes, characters are there, and you've explained that you steal and mix and match and all that. But it's not just the way they're built, but then the assortment of characters that you've brought into this book. And once as a reader, I get to know them, and the way you've described is such that, they become living. They start springing out of the pages of the book. Then as a reader, I can figure out that this definitely is going to, it's like nuclear fuel in a reactor. It's going to, start a chain reaction with a lot of energy flowing out of it. In a way, I felt that once you've created this set of characters, the book, gets made. That, I think, was something that that I felt very strongly about the book. And the other thing that I found is, having created so many characters, 6 people here, and described them so in such great detail that, after that, to handle the interactions, I think that's a pretty challenging thing. Most books would not be so, they'd go deep into one character or 2, and then it becomes easy because the others are superficially, interacting. So whatever happens can be done. But here what happens is you've brought in tremendous amount of insight into these people, their minds, their outlooks, their history in the case of Prashanti. So you really know them as real people. And then as a reader, I find that they're so very real. That's what holds me there. And I was just marveling how you managed to do it, and how does this, terrific insight into human behavior, where is it from? How does it happen?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Vinod. I think a lot of it is just observation. Again, there are certain things that come naturally to you, I guess. And this might be one of those. I hope I don't sound immodest when I say that. But I do think that I only with these people because of the length of the book, you know, and because of how many characters there were. But you know, when people tell me that the characters stayed with them long after they read the book, it makes me feel that my mission has been accomplished. And I think the main thing is that you should have fun writing. I'm just going to make it simple. If you enjoy these characters, if you want to hug as well as throttle Prasanthi, if you're somehow, I mean, I'm not going to say, you know, these are likable characters at all, because they definitely are not. But if there is a degree of investment in the character, you just start having fun writing it. And I think that is where, that is what shows in Land Where I Flee. As I've said many times, I do think that The Gorkha's Daughter is the superior book to Land Where I Flee. But I think Land Where I Flee is the more fun book. You know, and again, part of the reason it's so much fun is because of these characters, because of what they do, what they say. There were so many points that my editor wrote back to me during the editing stage where he goes, oh, a brother and sister wouldn't talk that way. And I go, no, they would. I mean, there's a degree of closeness here. I think there's a section there where when Mansa is being nasty to Rutwa goes, shaking your father-in-law's little pee-pee or something to Mansa.
Yeah.
Right? And I didn't. I wanted it there because that's exactly what Rutwa would say, and that would be just the thing that would piss Mansa off at that point. And yeah, I am so glad we had this discussion. It's made me thankful about why I write. And again, Julie, thank you for having me over. I normally dislike book club meetings. I'll tell you what. It's but this feels like a nice fireplace in a lovely Darjeeling house with creaking floorboards and with people asking just the right questions. And this has been one of my favorite appearances in the hundreds and hundreds of things I've done with regard to the book. And thank you for having me over. Thank you for coming up with the questions that you did, the points that you made. And it's just been so marvelous. And I promise you, when I say this, I do not say this all the time. This has been excellent.
We are overwhelmed. And I think I speak on the behalf of everyone here and the club and the book club members. This kind of veracity, this kind of truth-telling, sharing from your heart, your writing process, your thinking process, we are very honored and very privileged. And, you know, you really have, in my opinion, gone up 100 notches. Thank you so much, Prajwal, from all of us. But your visit to Kolkata, and I think Mr. Arindam Shield's invitation to you on behalf of the Bengal Club stands, and Harish and I extend that. And we would love for you to come and visit. If you're coming in November, if you could factor in a couple of days, we would be so happy. We would love to have you as our guest. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very, very kind of you. And
thank you so much.
Again, I'm sorry to the master's students whose questions I couldn't answer, but I hope there was enough to discuss.
Yes,
and,
I'm sure the master students are over the moon because they didn't have to do any hard work and they got all the benefits today from all of us working for them. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thank you,
Prajwal. Have a good trip to London. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
God bless.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. We'll keep you informed about the next title, and we'll have it towards the end of November.